Thank you for staying with Newsnight. Please keep your views coming and your questions as well at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Newsnight. My guest tonight is Honorable Aidan Mohamed, the CS for the Ministry of East African Community and Regional Development. We're speaking to him in regards to the Kenya-Tanzania relations, whether we've pressed the reset button now that the head of state for Tanzania, President Samia Suluhu, is in Kenya for a two-day state visit right after a visit in Uganda. There's been allegations that our trade relations with TZ has been a little bit frosty. Is this the turning point? And CS, thank you so much for making time. What will be the overall gain for Kenya out of this state visit by President Samia Suluhu?
Well, first of all, the visit by President Samia Suluhu Hassan is the first official state visit out of Tanzania by her. And we are very happy and privileged for Kenya to be that country where she chose to visit during her first official state visit outside of the United Republic of Tanzania. Kenya and Tanzania are key players within the East Africa community, and as a region, we have a very, very strong relationship, one that is symbiotic, that depends on one another. We do significant amount of business and trade, people to people, and it's only appropriate that I think her visit is going to cement what has been a strong bilateral relationship between our two neighborly countries. I think in the past, it's fair to say that a few incidences that has happened across our borders may have been pronounced and taken out of context. And yet, Tanzania is a very, very critical trading partner with Kenya. It's our second biggest market after Uganda. And it has a potential of being one of the biggest markets for us in this region, but also a very critical player as we are within the East Africa community. And so it is true that recognizing that A, we are neighbors, but B, we are members of the East African community, which is a trading bloc, a customs union that we are all part of, is to discuss issues that have been pronounced in the past as negative, from a negative perspective that has been talked about in the past. You know, how do we address these kind of issues? But more importantly, build on the opportunities and the potential that both countries present to one another.
CS, would you say this is the turning point? Because just a few years ago, in 2018 and 2017, 5,000 chicks were banned in Tanzania that were from Kenya, and some animals auctioned without any consultations in Nairobi at all. A year before that, 6,400 chicks were also banned in Tanzania. Is this a turning point in our relations?
We hope that this is going to signal a very, very significant moment for our relations going forward. It has been strong, as I said, and if I ask people to name, you know, a few issues or incidents other than the cows and the chickens, there are much more positive developments between our two countries than there are some of those specific issues. But one of the things that were discussed today, and President Suluhu is going to be with the private sector, the business forum in the morning, is to actually talk to the business communities from Tanzania and Kenya combined in a business forum. And part of that is to really address the concerns that might be on the minds of the business community on both sides. And I've just come out of the state banquet where President Samia Suluhu was speaking. And just to quote her verbatim, she said there will be no more banning of chicken across the border in Tanzania. And I think that is a really, really significant point that she has made. And neither, she said, are we going to see trucks held at border points for reasons that have been, you know, petty on both sides. And both presidents were today very clear that they want their respective ministers to address and discuss these issues with now a very, very clear, aligned perspective from the two heads of states of both countries. So I am very hopeful, as I'm sure the business community will be tomorrow, that some of the trade barriers that both countries allege have been placed by, you know, one or the other is going to be directly asked and will be dealt with, as she has already started talking to some of those issues, such as the chickens.
Yeah. So yes, I'm glad you mentioned the chicks not being burnt, because you said you've quoted a verbatim, and the truck drivers also. Just last month, there was a lot of complaints, considering we seem to have been reading from different scripts between Kenya and Tanzania when it comes to the COVID-19 issue, and now some of our trucks are being held by the border. What is she suggesting to be the way forward on this issue of truck drivers?
The responsibility and the onus, I think, is on both sides. As we all know, we both, as countries, benefit from the union of East Africa community. Because individually, we are small markets, but collectively, we are a market of 170, 180 million people. And to be able to do business within that region is something that each one of us would benefit immensely from. And today, Tanzania is our second biggest market, as I said, but we hope to see how that can be expanded. Tanzania, on the other hand, has actually, in the last 10 years, been seeing significant amount of business growth in terms of exports into Kenya that has been substantially growing, more than even what Kenya has been, exporting to Tanzania. So there are specific issues that both countries have identified as barriers, and you will never eradicate these things 100%. However, they will continually be addressed, and they will be resolved one by one until we are truly and effectively barrier-free, if you like, community, where specific issues that causes delays, such as the border issues. For example, on the border, it's not only Tanzania, even with Uganda, there has been a lot of disruption arising out of COVID-19, for example, that because of different protocols that all countries are looking at differently, may have contributed to some of these delays. But I think what is important out of the visit today is one of commitment, right at the head of state level, where both are now committed to drive the agenda of EAC to the next level, and specifically dealing with the bilateral issues that may have been making headlines between our two countries.
How do we harmonize that relation between Kenya and Tanzania so that it's not so much personality driven, but a symbiotic, seamless relation, that it doesn't matter who's at the helm, it continues seamlessly?
Ultimately, the citizens of both countries will have a very strong say in how we interact with one another. Both governments have signed to the East African Community Treaty that has certain commitments that we all have underwritten to make. So, for example, we are now all part of one customs union, common market. Hopefully soon we will have a monetary union. And finally, leading to a political federation at some stage in future, as we continue to deal with some of these issues. And truth be told, significant amount of progress, I think not only by Kenya or Tanzania, but by all EAC member states, have been registered from this community. And that is something that everybody benefits from, and it's in everybody's interest to strengthen this community. But bilaterally, where we share borders, there will always be pockets of issues, oftentimes arising out of interpretation by customs or border officials at these border points, who make rules based on some interpretation of what they have or some directive from some middle-level managers. But what we have heard today in terms of message and commitment from the two heads of states is that those issues will be issues of the past, and people will now be formed into teams to actually address each of these things one by one. There are reasons. I mean, every country has a reason why some of these things may not happen or has not happened in the past. And so, for example, there has been some challenges on maize imports from Tanzania into Kenya. Tanzania may see it as Kenya stopping maize coming into Kenya, but Kenya is looking at it more as an aflatoxin-infested maize that is being stopped because of health reasons, as opposed to, as opposed to maize being stopped. But the truth of the matter is Kenya needs maize from Tanzania, and Tanzania needs to sell maize to Kenya.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where we really have to make it work together. And part of the direction that was given by both heads of state today is for those issues to be resolved amicably at the quickest possible time.
Yeah, these issues have always been there, CS. So the question for me is it a communication barrier? Is that where the problem was? Because like the example you've just given is very clear. Tanzania thinks we're stopping maize from coming in. We are thinking we're stopping it because it has aflatoxin. Why don't you at the helm speak about this before it becomes a standoff at the border point?
Well, you only hear about some of these things once every year or 2 years. That in itself is good. You're not hearing about it every day. And when there is that misunderstanding and there is that crisis at the border, people sit down, discuss, get an understanding, and resolve. For example, the burning of chickens only happened once, and never has it happened again. And there are reasons that were given, and there are explanations that we sought as government to see to make sure that something like that doesn't happen. And Tanzania also vice versa is making sure that we do the right thing in the spirit of the protocol of East Africa community that we are all subscribing to. And so I think if you look at the macro level, where two governments recognize that for us to succeed individually as countries, we must work together in the context of this broader market that we all, benefit out of,
yeah,
as opposed to, trading within our own borders as individual countries. Can I say that there will be zero issues in the long-term foreseeable future? Very unlikely. Even in our own country, there will always be issues between counties where you're trading with one another. The important thing is there an environment? Is there a climate? Is there commitment at all levels that is being placed to make sure that as and when these issues arise, then the appropriate mechanisms and channels are provided to make sure that they are fixed.
Yeah.
And so we should, I think, celebrate the commitments by our two heads of states today, where both of them have given very, very clear commitments on their desire to make sure that these non-tariff barriers that have been on the headlines for a very long time between our two countries is going to be an issue of the past. Okay. Now, of course, the relevant technical people, ministers, will have to make it work, whether it's agriculture or trade or health. There has to be a significant amount of working together to bring to reality some of the wishes of the two heads of states in their discussions today.
Jacob Abere Matlala here on Twitter says, now that Dar es Salaam and Nairobi have renewed and re-energized their bilateral relationship, my question to Minister Aidan is, Kenyans have fruits and vegetables farmers in Tanzania, Kahama in Arusha, Kilimanjaro and Ruvuma. What is the place for them, knowing that it feeds Nairobi?
Well, those people, we today are receiving significant amount of agricultural produce coming out of Tanzania into Kenya. That will probably continue for a very long time because that is what Tanzania has natural advantage of, given the size of land, the climate, the environment. And we will continue to provide the market for those produce. And so my message to him is produce more.
Yeah.
We are part of East Africa community. We are open, and production in Western Kenya is as open to come to Nairobi as is production by a farmer in Arusha. That is what a customs union and a common market is supposed to provide.
Is there any significance that President Samia Suluhu chose to go to Uganda first before she came here?
Well, there was a specific from the media reports that we have seen, discussion that she went to do in Uganda. And I think that is something that, as the President of the Republic of Tanzania, she decides. This is an official state visit, and there are a number of issues that were discussed. My understanding is that was to discuss the pipeline between Kampala and the port of Tanga.
Okay. Chester Nyantika says both Kenya and Tanzania are members of other similar blocs, IGAD and SADC, respectively, aren't we being repetitive, overlapping and duplicating objectives of those same blocks and becoming almost monotonous, Bwana Waziri?
Well, it is true that some of these blocks are created arising out of a specific need. Some are security driven, some are economic blocks, and some are broader economic blocks that overlaps the other, like COMESA and SADC.
Yeah.
Tanzania is part of SADC, we are part of COMESA. And so some of these overlaps do happen, but they have different significance, I think, for different reasons. And whilst COMESA is a free trade arrangement, meaning you can sell and buy between these countries without having to pay duty,
yeah.
I think East Africa is a much more integrated customs union where you have a common external tariff, for example. So if a finished good is imported into Tanzania, it attracts a duty of 25%. The same good coming into Kenya will attract 25%. That is what common external tariff is supposed to do,
yeah.
And that is what part of the customs union and the common market does. And I think eventually what will happen is there will be the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is now covering what are the economic trading blocks like ECOWAS in West Africa, EAC, the Southern Africa blocks, and maybe the Arab world. Now that all the African countries have signed to Africa Continental Free Trade Area, there will come a time when that would become probably what EAC is now today.
Okay.
The reality, of course, is the more countries there are, the need for integration may require a lot more effort from the 54 member states, going by the experience of some of the regional blocks that we have seen now.
Okay. Mark Oseno says the visit by Her Excellency Suluhu is of immense economic importance to both our countries. We must, however, as Kenyans, address corruption, trade shortcuts that lead to evasion of tax and double aggression to our neighbors. That was Tanzania's fear. There's a very thin line between healthy competition and fair competition and stifling local growth. Is this an issue that you're concerned about in terms of corruption and trade shortcuts, as Mark Oseno is saying?
You see, ultimately, what the government role is to make sure that the business environment and the climate is conducive for attracting investments into our respective countries. We are doing it in a manner that has been echoed in President Kenyatta's Jubilee Manifesto in the last 10 years, which is one of really taking advantage of the strengths and the advantages Kenya has, as opposed to what other advantages other countries do have. So, for example, reducing the overall cost of doing business through investments in infrastructure, whether it's the roads, the rail, the port structure, and so on and so forth, will one day, once all these infrastructure programs are complete, make it much more easier for things to be moved around. We are now moving oil from Mombasa right through the jetty to Kisumu, as opposed to trucks that has been moving around, you know, on the roads between Mombasa and Kisumu in the past. And then through Lake Victoria, hopefully that would move things. And then we've also been working on the softer issues of the ease of doing business, which is really changing the regulations, policies, laws that are much more business friendly to attract investors, both domestic as well as foreign. Now, Tanzania would also do similar things. I'm sure those kind of investments are happening. Ultimately, what we want to do is investors, especially foreign investors, will have a choice whether to locate here or in Tanzania, and that is something that we leave to the private sector to do. But we want, wherever they choose to invest, if they invest in Tanzania, what we are saying is by virtue of Kenya being part of the East African Common Market, that they can access the Kenyan market. And vice versa should be true as well, where an investor locating in Kenya can also access the Tanzanian market without any hindrance. And that is the attraction of the EAC community, and that is why today we have a substantial number of people located here, substantial number of Kenyan investors in Tanzania, And as President Suluhu mentioned this evening, she will now want to whip a lot more private sector players in Tanzania to come and invest in Kenya.
Yeah.
And President Kenyatta has been very clear about Kenya to East African community citizens as their second home, where they can come, invest, own land, own property, marry, do anything that they want, just as they would in their home country.
In fact, you've already touched on my next question. Have you noticed a significant difference in trade relations approach from the two heads of state, President Samia Suluhu and the former head of state in the late John Pombe Magufuli?
Well, I think it is too early to say, you know, what difference in style is. We can only basically say that both presidents have been very committed to making sure that the East African community works for the purpose for which it's intended. And to a large extent, I have to repeat this often, it is working. It is working, otherwise we will not be having Tanzania as our second biggest market after Uganda. And I'm sure Kenya will not remain a significantly important market for Tanzania if that is not the case. And so think about it, a 50 million population in Kenya versus 180 million population of the community, where would you want to play? And the same is true for Tanzania. What we want to do is to make sure that that relationship is seamless. And those frictions can be arising from any point. Oftentimes at the border points, we just want to make sure that we create a mechanism that would encourage and make commitments to make sure that these issues are resolved much more seamlessly than they have been in the past.
Yeah. Soko analyst here says, please ask the CS what they're doing to reduce the cost of farming to make our maize competitive against the imports from Tanzania.
You see, as I said, every country or every business, wherever they are, whether they are producing in Kenya or Tanzania, would see the region as one market. And everybody knows that the challenges of farming and farmlands that we have in our country is now becoming much more reduced from commercial big farms, where the cost of per acre is increasing because the economies of scale, by virtue of land being big, is now being eliminated over time. And Tanzania is able to do that a lot more efficiently and probably have even bigger land that is subjected to maize farming, for example. And so those advantages and those competitiveness are things that our respective ministries of agriculture, for example, are aware of to support the farmers in their respective countries. And so it also depends on how much profit per bag is a farmer in Kenya looking for vis-a-vis a farmer in Tanzania. At the end of the day, the millers who are based in Kenya will have to see how they can actually obtain a competitively priced maize, bag of maize, either from Tanzania or here. And remember, we of course have obligation to our farmers, and we should be able to buy their, produce. But if we buy expensive bag of maize from here, it will translate into an expensive bag, expensive 2 kilogram flour that, of ugali that you see in the supermarket. And that will feed into, an expensive demand for wage rise, every Labor Day, because the cost of goods is expensive. And so there are some economies of scale issues that I think both countries have to look at, and we should be able to play to our strengths and see how we can compete with Tanzanian farmers or indeed any other farmers in other part of the region.
CS, could the simple answer just be we have an unsustainable tax regime that heavily taxes farm inputs?
Well, I wouldn't say, remember, Kenya government has been giving a lot of incentives and support in form of fertilizer and in form of support to the drying of maize, for example. And that support has been coming for a very long time. That said, there is a general concern raised by farmers in the past about the high cost of inputs, and that goes for animal feeds as well, where the cost of feeds is higher relative to some of the other neighboring countries. And so these are issues, of course, that need to be balanced between the need for us to be competitive and the need for us to be able to actually raise the necessary revenue from all the sectors of the economy.
Okay. Sharpshooter here says the most important thing to abolish immediately is the cessation of the 25% customs duty levied on goods manufactured in Kenya. This has killed squeezed economic businesses in Kenya. Do you agree?
There are no goods that are manufactured in Kenya that attract 25% duty. 25% duty is only imposed on goods that are imported into the country. In fact, in a way to make the Kenyan produced goods more competitive, without having to pay those taxes. So that is something that is probably not accurate. Kenyan produced goods don't attract customs duty. Customs, by their very nature, are for goods that are imported into the country.
Okay. Linda Chepkwony says on the issue of signing multilateral trade agreements as EAC bloc, the issue in context being the upcoming Kenya-US free trade agreement, considering we went into the Kenya-UK economic partnership agreement alone, is this sustainable?
The issue of trade agreements with the rest of the world by EAC member states is one that has been a subject of debate for a very long time. And the most famous one that is being remembered by many people is the arrangement we had with the European Union, the European Partnership Agreement, which has been a subject of discussion at all the summit levels. The issue there really is that whilst we are all part of one common market called East African Community, 5 of the other member states can access European markets without having to pay duty for their goods. Yet, Kenya will have to pay duty for their goods like flowers. And those flowers that pay duty will be very uncompetitive, and will have millions of our flower workers in Naivasha jobless if we did not sign that agreement. And so this imbalance, if you like, where we are all classified differently between developing and less developed LDCs, has been the bone of contention that has challenged us in some of these things. But the important thing is, as a customs union, we should all be aware of any arrangements that any member states enter into with a third party. And that conversation will happen at the appropriate time. For example, when we engage conclusively with the United States, that arrangement and that agreement will have to be brought to the attention of other member states for them to comment, for them to express their views, and then we discuss on what is the most appropriate way of gaining that access that other countries have, but Kenya doesn't have.
Okay. Weshitari says, my name is Julius Induswe. I work at a cement factory. We desire to sell cement in northern Tanzania, e.g. Arusha, but Tanzania has imposed almost 50% taxes, hence becoming uncompetitive. We have sufficient capacity to supply cement competitively from Athi River. Ask the TZ to remove those taxes.
This is one of the examples of a specific issue that would be a subject of discussion with our colleagues in Tanzania. We are aware of that. And it will be on the table for discussion with TZ officials.
All right, so this is a discussion that is on the table. Let's see what else is coming through here. A lot of questions coming through for UCS. Truth Master Okelo Mwalimu says, for the newfound Kenya-Tanzania diplomatic love to last, Kenya must cease behaving like the big brother, and Tanzania must learn to be a team player. No country can survive on its own. Both countries are independent but largely interdependent. Have we been behaving like the big brother, CS?
No, we haven't. I think the point made that we have to be interdependent and live together to make sure that, the benefit of working together is much more than working individually. is evident, and I think that is what we heard today from the both heads of states.
Yeah. Grace Toroitich says, ask the CS, Trevor, that why can't they make the environment conducive for us farmers so that we can feed ourselves instead of importing almost everything from our neighbors?
Well, there is no benefits of anything being given preference to be imported from outside as opposed to buying from next door. It's just a matter of fact that if you speak to our maize millers in this country, for example, they argue that they don't get sufficient amount of maize in country, and so that's how they end up going to Uganda, to Tanzania first, because they are part of the community. And if those markets don't also have enough, that is when you go outside of the East African community to other markets. And so naturally, you would expect people to buy from next door, as in next county, if you are in Nairobi. And if that doesn't have enough, then you expand outside into the community, from community to COMESA, from COMESA to the rest of the world.
Okay. So let's talk about something else here, CS. You know, in the EAC, recently there was a change of leadership in the secretariat there, with the Kenyan, Peter Mathuki, actually taking over the chairmanship as well as in the driving seat of the EAC. What will this partnership benefit Kenya with that is so different?
Well, Peter Mathuki, as the new Secretary General of the EAC Secretariat, will be working for EAC member states. He will not be working for Kenya. He will be working, he was employed and hired by the summit. All the heads of states approved his appointment. He just happens to be a Kenyan, and the position is a rotational one that moves from one country to the other. And so whilst he's there, he will be serving the interest of the community to make sure that the protocols and the treaty is implemented and the rules are adhered to make sure that we have a successful community. That said, of course, he has other advantages, and why he was chosen to be in that position is his understanding of some of the issues. Peter worked in the IALA, East African Legislative Assembly, representing Kenya previously, so he understands the legislative arm of the community. He was also the immediate former CEO of the East African Business Council.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest issues that we face or are highlighted as problematic is our trading issues with one another within the region. And so as somebody who has been the CEO of the Business Council in the region, he would have a very good grasp of the issues and will be able to jointly, together with some of his previous colleagues, be able to solve this and bring it to the attention of respective governments within the community.
Okay. Joshua Kadu says, please ask the CAS to discuss the work permit issue in Tanzania for Kenyans.
Yes, there is an issue of the work permit issue. Again, one of the issues on the table for discussion that we are having to engage our colleagues from Tanzania.
So that is also something you'll report on later on, right?
Correct.
When was this discussion being held? When is it being held?
No, these are issues that are currently between the two countries as outstanding, that we need to engage the Tanzanian colleagues to make sure that we get some of those issues addressed at the earliest possible time.
Yeah, there's a concern here of our cost of production when it comes to farming. In fact, the question is, we should simply reduce our cost of production if our farmers are to survive. I know this is a multilateral perspective because there's a Ministry of Agriculture as well, but is this issue one of the things that you should be discussing, the cost of production for farmers? They're the ones who are mostly complaining here.
That is a Kenya issue. That is not Tanzania or any other country's issue. The commitment that the government has is generally, as I say, to reduce the cost of production. And cost of production, to a large extent, depending on which industry or sector you are in, is driven by one or two key issues. So for example, if you are a manufacturing entity, cost of energy becomes a very key player. If you are an apparel's textile industry where significant amount of cost is arising from employing people, cost of labor, and they pay a lot of attention to the May 1 Labor Day pay rises. If you are in agriculture, the cost of inputs is becoming an issue, and the climate and the weather. So each of these issues are being dealt with by separate sectors within the government to address in bringing the cost of production down for each of these specific issues. So, for example, on the issue of energy costs for manufacturers, one of the things that the government has embarked on is to work out a program of setting up an industrial zones or parks in Naivasha, where the cost of energy is going to be a fraction of what it is if you are setting up a manufacturing entity in Mombasa or Nairobi or anywhere else. So whilst today you probably get charged 18 cents or thereabouts US cents, potentially you could be charged between 5 and 7 cents if that operation in Naivasha happens.
Yeah.
It's a big, push to bring the cost of production for manufacturers down, especially if you're a heavy producer and heavy consumer of energy.
Okay.
And the Ministry of Agriculture, working with the farmers, are also working on ways of bringing down the cost of inputs, and hopefully we can be competitive. But one of the biggest threats that I mentioned earlier on is the farm size continues to shrink, and therefore the unit cost of producing a bag of maize becomes higher year in, year out as we continue to subdivide our agricultural lands in this country. And that, I think, is a reality that we have to deal with as a country.
Okay. Collins Kongoti says, what are you doing to ensure we have a common currency in East African countries? Wouldn't we be stronger that way? Well,
surprise, surprise, it is part of one of the pillars, the 4 pillars of the East African Community Treaty. One is the customs union, which we already are, common market, which encourages free movement of people, labor, capital, and so on and so forth. The third one is the monetary union, where you will eventually end up having exactly what he's asking about, having a common currency, where you don't have to deal with this exchange risks and so on and so forth that today people incur by exchanging Kenya shilling and Tanzania shilling and Uganda shilling. The basic infrastructure towards achieving that dream has been put in place. The heads of states have all signed the EAC Monetary Institute setting bill that is now law, and it is now going to be realized as we get to that journey of having one common currency. But that is a program that would have a lot of discussion with the financial sector, the treasury, the central banks of each of the countries.
Yeah.
But it is an agenda that is committed to by EAC member states that is now, down the line in terms of bringing that dream to come to life.
Yeah. CS, as we wind up on this, COVID-19 has been one of the biggest disruptors of business, and Tanzania and Kenya have been reading from different books for the longest time. Is there some level of concurrence now when it comes to dealing with COVID-19 and business?
Well, I can only comment on what Kenya government is doing in terms of dealing with COVID, and that I think I don't need to belabor the point of the action the government is taking, the various lockdowns, the procedures and the protocols that have been outlined by the Ministry of Health. I think all I can say on what is going on in the region is every country within the EAC community is also having their own ways of dealing with COVID.
Yeah.
The latest in Tanzania that we have seen is a release by the Ministry of Health on a new protocol on visitors, both Tanzanians and non-Tanzanians, coming through border points, and what they will be subjected to as a way of making sure that any risk of COVID is mitigated. And President Suluhu Hassan has also, I think, from the media reports that we have seen, set up a task force to review the issues of around COVID in Tanzania, and the outcome of that, I'm sure, will be presented to her and some decisions will be made. So we wait and see what happens in that.
Yeah.
But for now, I think just like it is going on in all parts of the world, every country is dealing with this on a domestic basis.
Yeah.
And where collaborations are made possible, especially where you have a common border, that is something that is being discussed and worked on by relevant health ministers.
Okay. Was there any conversation around tourism? Because that's one of the issues that has been there. Accusations, Serengeti, burning grass so that the wildebeest don't cross, things like that.
I think there are a few broad areas that Kenya is seeking to get resolved through discussion with the Tanzanian government, and tourism is one of them, especially around movements of people, movements of tourists between our countries and what mode of transport that they use. That is one broad area. The issue around work permits of people working in our respective countries is another area that we need to discuss with. Issues around, especially around this COVID time, of movements of agricultural produce, specifically maize, is one area that is also a subject of discussion that is out there in public. There are other broader issues that are not necessarily bilateral Kenya-Tanzania issue, but affects the broader EAC engagements. And that is, you know, just looking at how we interact together as EAC member states. Whilst the treaty was set up when there were only 3 countries, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, some of the rules of engagement of how things can happen that were fit for purpose for 3 countries is no more fit for purpose when we are now 6 countries. Or when we probably potentially get new members coming in. Yeah. And so those broader EAC issues are also a subject of engagement that we will be discussing, not only with Tanzania, but with other members. Yeah. But the important thing to note, I think, is much as a few specific issues get pronounced if they don't work well, the benefits of working together as individual countries in the context of EAC far outweighs the problems that are continuously being highlighted as and when they happen.
All right. CS, thank you so much for making time for us this evening. I know you had a long state function. Honorable Aidan Mohamed, the CS for the Ministry of East African Community and Regional Development, thank you so much for speaking to us. And I see a lot of your conversations have posed most of the questions to the CS. That's where we leave it for now. My name is Trevor Mbija, and on behalf of the entire team that made this possible, thank you so much for watching. And of course, special thanks from Wilton Mushoro, who's been a sign language interpreter tonight. I've been sitting in for Oiga Moore. I'll be back next week. All right, bye for now.